Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Raggio. I'm a senior fellow at Foundation for Defense of Democracies and editor of FDD's Long War Journal. This is Generation Jihad, the podcast that covers all things in what used to be known as the global war on terror, but we now call the Long War. And today, I'm happy to have my co-host, Joe Trusman, back on the show. Joe is a research analyst at FDD and one of our editors at FDD's Long War Journal. Joe is returning from a trip to Israel. That's why Joe hasn't been on for the last couple of weeks. Also with the holidays and other things going on, we're going to get back on track. Joe, welcome back to Generation Jihad. Great to hear your voice again.
Hey, Bill. Yeah, really happy to be here. It's been a while, I feel like. So
it has. I think before Christmas.
Yeah, for a while there, we were just doing these several times a week, and then all of a sudden just stopped. But yeah, it's I've been out and away, but happy to be here again.
Yeah, we're happy to have you back on, Joe. You're just getting back from Israel, and tell us, a lot to talk about. That's what we're going to talk about today. What did you see? What did you hear? What is your observations on your trip? I guess the first question I'd have for you, tell us, this is your first time going to a war zone. Tell us a little bit about your experience with that. What did you think about that whole process? I know we talked about that going forward and you never had experienced something like that. I have a little bit of experience doing that in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it certainly does change your perceptions of how things work. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so just like you were saying, it is my first time to an actual war zone. Previous years, obviously I've followed conflicts between Israelis and the Palestinians for a very long time, but it's different when you're on the ground, right? So I got the opportunity to go during this time, so I did, and just a few points. So as an analyst, right? It's your goal is to understand whether like a conflict, for example, to understand it as best as you can, right? So it's really easy to read the news and stay on top of the news, as much as you can. But a lot of that is just someone else's perspective, technically, right? So when they're writing, you're reading what they think about what's going on, and yeah, they're facts too. So that's in there. So that's another thing, but. It's a whole different experience when you're actually there. And that's why I wanted to go, all right? Because I wanted to see it. I wanted to smell it. I wanted to feel it. So that's what I did. And I went to several places, but one...
Where'd you go, Joe? Where did you...
Yeah, so I was in the northern, just at the border. I never went actually inside of Gaza, but I was at the northern border of the Gaza Strip and Israel. And also... in the south, not far from the Egyptian border, but still, Israeli territory and on the Gaza border. So I went to this one specifically. I went to this one community that was attacked on October 7th. The community is called Nir Oz. It's fairly small, and I went there to see what had happened, right? And I toured the community for a few hours and went inside the homes that were attacked, and most of the homes were either burned almost completely, right, or destroyed by gunfire or by other means. So we went in there. I went inside to see, and let me tell you something. This is very important. These areas that I went to, these homes, they're like almost untouched since October 7th. There's still blood on the ground. There's still blood on the walls from the Israelis or other victims of Hamas's attack. So they haven't. It's not like they cleaned it up. There's glass everywhere. You can still smell. There's a smell of burnt wood, right? Because a lot of these homes were burned, right, with people still inside of them. So that was an experience. And then, of course, during all this time, while I'm touring this one specific community, I'm hearing the sound of war, right? Like artillery going out, drones, gunfire, what I'm assuming are helicopters, Apache helicopters, gunships, because you could hear them. They're almost above you. You can see them too, actually, and fighting, like the shooting. So you have all this going around, all this noise, right, of war, and this constant buzzing of drones. It's like the lawnmower of the sky, basically. I don't know how else
No,
to
that's
describe
pretty
it.
much
It's
everybody's description of it.
it's really it's annoying after a while, and but it's distinct, right? So anyway, so yeah, so it was really interesting. Something else that something I got to experience as well. I think it's important is when I was touring Nir Oz in one of the Israeli communities that was attacked. Um, there was still the smell of death. All right, and that's something if you haven't experienced it before, it's quite unique. Still, I still smell it to this day, to be quite honest with you, just randomly. And it's very strange. It's horrible, of course, but what had happened was in this area of the community, from what I understand, from what I was told by the IDF, because I was there with it. By the way, this is all a closed military zone. People just can't just walk right
This
in
is
there.
why everything is still as it is, right? No
Exactly,
one's going in and cleaning up.
exactly.
It's still, like you said, a war zone,
It
basically.
is, yeah. Oh, yeah. You can't just stroll up there, stroll up in there. So this is a closed military zone, but snows with the IDF. I was allowed to go in there. So we're in this it's like a community hall where usually they would serve the food and anyway, but in there they had, from what the army told me, following the attack, they had to store bodies in there, and and on top of that, there was still food that was there. That to feed the community, and it was all rotting. So you had the smell of rotting food and death there weren't bodies there anymore, don't get me wrong, but it still lingered in there. It was really strong, and that's just that mix. My gosh, it was tough. It was very difficult walking through there. uh so but yeah, it's another experience that I had that I've never gone through before. Uh so yeah, and then one last quick thing. Also the danger of being shelled. All right, so in Israel there's this warning system. It's usually called Tzeva Adom, which is like a red alert, and it's an app, basically, and it tells you, hey, if you're wherever, hey, there could be a possibility of rockets or mortars or even drones in your area. So I'm driving through, and this is kind of like the countryside, almost the best way I can describe it. I got this app with me, my phone on, because there's a real possibility of being shelled, right? And thankfully, nothing happened. But I would go through a community, and then 5 minutes later, that community was under attack, right? So, but that's another feeling of being like, oh my gosh, I could be hurt here, right? I got to be very careful. So, something here I think here living in the United States, in the West, we don't have to worry about being shelled or being mortared or being hit by a drone. None of that, right? But people in the South, especially in southern Israel, and in Israel in general, do have to worry about. Okay, so that's something I've never really had to experience before. Always having my phone on me, right? Um, I would be alerted, and of course there are different types of alerts there as well. But where I was, I needed my phone. So I think that's interesting. But yeah, but I just the one thing I'm glad I went. I'm glad I was there. I'm glad I got to experience everything, experience war, seeing all the military vehicles and soldiers. But yeah, it's just, but a part of it's difficult to describe without actually being there. But you know about this, Bill, right? I mean,
It's a
you
surreal
know,
experience, Joe. It certainly is. And I mean, look,
right?
I know our people, the listeners, who served in Iraq and Afghanistan or some other foreign militaries, in other places, people who've been to Ukraine, they're very familiar with this experience. And one point that you make, right, that you would, if you're reading the news, you would think that all of the fighting in Gaza is one sided, that the Israelis are just attacking. And yet there's rockets every day being fired
Yeah,
from Gaza, that
yeah,
Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and other groups, despite the fact that they're on the defensive against the Israelis assault, they're still able to muster the energy and the resources to fire rockets into Israel. So
yeah,
this is why the fighting continues, because
exactly.
they are not laying down their arms. They are not ceasing attacks on Israel.
Mhm.
They're doing everything they can. But yeah, Joe, your experiences, it's one many who are listening to are very familiar with. I remember my first embed in Ramadi when I was in Ramadi in 2005 in Anbar province, sitting outside, getting on the satellite phone back when, but at that point in time, this tells you how old I am and how long I've been doing this. Getting this, cell phone was a luxury. And you had to get a SIM card. It was a nightmare. So anyway, I would bring a satellite phone. I was just trying to link up with John Batchelor on his radio program, and mortars started coming into the compound, and one hit about 150 yards from where I was sitting at a picnic table in these buildings in the base in Ramadi, and just hit outside the zone. And so, yeah, very familiar with all of those. It's very you certainly take life here for granted when you once you get into a war zone like in Iraq or in Israel or in
Right.
Afghanistan or any of these places in Ukraine. When you experience this, it's something that will stick with you, and that's that smell of death. Yeah, I recall that. I could still smell that. I remember, and look, if I didn't have any dark humor, I wouldn't have any. But like we joked in Fallujah that we should create a cologne called Eau de Fallujah.
Oh
It would
no.
be dead bodies, diesel fuel, and burning tires and cordite,
Right.
and that was basically that way we could remind us all of that beautiful experience of Fallujah and other fun places in Iraq. So. But Joe, tell us you were up at the border in northern Gaza. Any interesting observations there? Did you get a chance to
Uh,
talk to Israeli troops coming in and out of combat? There?
I didn't get the chance to talk to them. However, I did see the effects of war. Obviously, I talked earlier about the sounds and saw a lot of military equipment. You don't realize how large some of these tanks are. These tanks are. You see them in, of course, on TV, but these Merkava 4 tanks that the IDF uses. They're enormous. I saw there was a IDF D9 bulldozer as well. It's routinely used not only in Gaza now, but in the West Bank, and enormous bulldozers. And then yeah, then I got to see saw a few airstrikes. One that was directed by a drone. So that was pretty interesting to see in person. And then the one thing I did notice, which it's good for the Israelis, of course, is that they were very determined, not only just the soldiers, but the citizens too, right? They were determined to defeat Hamas and its partners in Gaza. That's 100% for sure. And another thing I found interesting is that life continued in Israel. Okay. There weren't as many, let's say, tourists. Okay, give them that. Uh, but people were still going out, right? People were still going to the cafes. They were shopping, things like that. You could still. It wasn't like it was pre-October 7th. Don't get me wrong, but still. Um, and so that was something good to see at least, but with the threat of war in the background as well. But I think a lot of people that I spoke to, they were concerned about Gaza, but I think they were more concerned about what's happening in the north, right, with Hezbollah. Because now, Hamas and its partners in Gaza, the Israeli military has really hammered them. Okay, so taking them away a lot of their capabilities, especially with rockets. But that huge threat still remains in the north. So I think a lot of people that I encountered and I spoke to we're very concerned about that more than anything. I think right now was, well, what could happen there, right? So yeah. So again, a lot of interesting stuff I saw. Spoke to a lot of people, but yeah, I think a big thing that still remains there is what's happening in the north.
Yeah, and before we turn to that, you anticipated my next question. What is the resolve of the Israeli people? There's been a lot of international pressure, even coming from the U.S., which is quite disturbing for the Israelis to wind down military operations in Gaza and go back to more of a targeting mode. The Israelis are saying that they're, and I don't know how much of this is just sort of to appease the West, because I'm not seeing this, at least from what I can tell from the reporting on the ground. They're still going in on the ground. It just seems to me that they've gotten a big chunk of the operations taken care of, and now they're focusing in more and more confined spaces. But have you detected is there a significant anti-war movement within Israel or protests? Have you seen anything like that? Or is it, as you said, is just the resolve is to defeat Hamas?
Right. I'll say this. When I first got off the plane in Tel Aviv, got off the plane, started walking. One of the first things I saw was rows and rows of posters of the missing the hostages. Uh, that's like one of the first things you see there. Okay, so right away I knew that well, is the most important thing right here for one of the most important things for Israel is getting these hostages. So um, and I know it's different seeing it in person too. Again, I go back to being there in person, right? So
It's,
so
it's
in
that Joe. Like it's we as analysts here in the United States, and look, there's a lot we can do from reading and talking to people and whatnot. But you do get a little detached from it, and getting over there, does give you a little perspective. And let's not pretend that we don't have every reporter, anyone analyst, everyone has biases. You have biases, I do. We admit what they are, but that doesn't mean that we can't be critical of what Israelis are doing or what the United States is doing. I mean, God knows if anyone watched my coverage of Afghanistan or Iraq or anything else, it was all to improve. The criticism comes from to try to make us improve, to do better. But yeah, that firsthand experience is it's something that just can't be discounted, and I'm really glad you got an opportunity to get it.
yeah, something that I kind of did already mention, but from the Israeli officials I spoke to all the way down to just taxi drivers that I spoke to, they all I didn't get a hint of people being tired of the war. Okay, not in one bit, which is good, right? They're very. I think it's one. I think a lot of people are just pissed off. They're
Yeah,
still
and it's
pissed
3 months
off.
later, then, and
Yeah.
that is actually kind of amazing, right? Because you would expect,
Right.
for there to be not expect. I mean, actually, I can't imagine I would be. I mean, this is 21 years after 20. What are we? 23 years after 9/11. I'm still
Right.
pissed off. So,
Right.
um, that's a good thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You need to hold that anger sometimes in order to drive you to do the things you need to do, because that was a horrific attack.
And I think people need to also understand that Israel, the Israelis, again, top to bottom, from the defense officials or whatever political echelon down, um, they're determined. Okay, so even you get all this noise that we're hearing, protests and this stuff at the UN and just criticizing the war. I it's gonna I don't see the from what I felt from people that I've talked to, I don't get the sense that Israel's going to back down on this. All right, I think people need to understand that what happened on October 7th wasn't just something minor for Israel. I think they almost see it as a type of a existential threat, having these groups, Hamas and other terror organizations on their borders. Okay, so they're determined to get rid of them despite everything else, like I said, all the noise going on. Uh, so yeah, it's something I something also that I noticed and firsthand, and so I thought that was pretty interesting too. So I don't think the Israelis are going to budge on this. To be quite honest with you, like they may, like with the fighting, they may not be as intense, but trying to convince Israel to stop, right? I don't think so. I don't think it's going to happen unless they fulfill whatever goals they're trying to achieve, right? Especially getting all those hostages back. That's up there.
Well, and then the defeat of Hamas. I mean, the government has been clear about that Hamas cannot return to
Right. Right.
governing Gaza, and nor should they. I mean, this would be like saying
Oh,
after Pearl Harbor that we should allow the Japanese to continue to occupy parts of Indochina. I mean, and
right.
the Philippines and whatnot, or we should allow the Nazis to control parts of France and Europe. I mean, you know, one of the things when I talk to people who are skeptical, and this is, I think, a result of watching the news and getting that one-sided appearance of that the Israelis are just attacking. There's no, the perspective of what happened on October 7th is lost. And I say
Yeah.
to people, I said, could you imagine if the Mexican drug cartels crossed the border and
Mm,
killed 20,000 Americans, which would be the equivalent, right, of 1,200 Israelis being killed.
Right.
What would our response be? When would
Right.
we stop? Would
Right.
we be looking for a ceasefire and took, thousands of Americans hostages? Would we just go, oh, well, we killed enough of them and we should stop?
Mhm.
Or would we continue to prosecute this? It's up close and personal for the Israelis, and there's no government, a lot, that would want to, or no nation would be able to exist by tolerating this, by
Right.
tolerating, look, I mean, based on what you're talking about, would the Israeli people allow the Israeli government to conduct
No,
a ceasefire with
I don't
Hamas?
think so.
Would the Israeli military accept that? These are like harsh realities. I'm not sitting here saying, people are plotting a coup or something like that, but there's internal pressures to keep up the operation against Hamas to recover those hostages. And that's the hostages, one of the things that I thought might be the thing that could divide the Israelis, but that doesn't seem to be. The Israeli government has, and the other thing too, Joe, everyone says this is Netanyahu's war. I've heard people say to me
No.
this was a black flag operation by Netanyahu to stay in power. And I'm sitting there going,
No.
man, look, there's a
No.
unity government that we haven't seen any cracks in that, right? His opposition figures have, walked in and taken key positions within the government. So it's really kind of annoying
It
to
is.
listen to some of that. But the people just don't understand this conflict like you and I do.
No, they don't. And I'll tell you something real quick. I think it's important to know. So this Israeli official I was speaking to, he said he put it very well. And at first I didn't understand him. So he said, on October 7th, Israel shrunk. And I was like, Israel shrunk? What are you talking about? Israel's still there. It still has its borders. Nothing's changed really, as far as borders. And it took me a while to understand what he meant by that. And but he was right. So there, Israelis in the north, a bunch of them had to be evacuated. Israelis in the
Well over
south,
100,000, right?
yeah, a lot. And then in the south too, there's no Israeli citizens on the border there living there anymore. It's just military. So he was right. Israel shrunk. The population had to move inward. They're living in hotels for the last few months. Or apartments that they had to get assistance to get in. People have been taking in Israelis because they have nowhere to go. Right. So, and he was right. Israel did shrink in a sense. Right. So anyway,
In another way too, Joe, I think the divisions within Israel, the political, because one of the things I experienced particularly on my last visit, I think it was in 2017. Boy, just the difference in opinion amongst the Israelis about, two-state solution and how to deal with Hamas.
right.
I think those divisions have shrunk as well amongst the Israeli people because I thought there would be some cracks beginning to appear at this point with an ongoing war, with the number of casualties the IDF has experienced, with the amount of people being displaced. But the Israelis seem to be, from their military to their government to the people, the civilians are on a war footing and they're serious.
Yeah, I
That's
think
where
they're
they need to
unified.
be.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but yeah, I think they're still unified with that. And I think there are disagreements, of course.
Of course.
And that's one thing. Uh, so yeah, they all feel the same way about what's happening, and but yeah, again, the priority is to get those hostages back. So I don't know, but one thing again, everywhere I went, pictures, posters, on TV of the hostages, everywhere, is pretty crazy actually. So, just that reminder is always there, right? Why all of this is happening, why they're at war. So, I think that's a good point to bring up.
Yeah, that is certainly something that the Israelis all agree upon. They care for their own, and it's shocking here in the United States. There's what, 8 American hostages still? Is that the right?
Yeah, something about that. I can't remember the exact number. Forgive me, but yeah, I think there still are. Yeah, and that's what pisses me off even more. They're Americans.
And we hear nothing about it, and as if we
Oh,
don't care,
as
and
if I
it's
forgot. Yeah,
frustrating.
yeah, and
Um,
come on, there's Americans there, guys. Like so, and
the
then
billions of dollars that we've invested in the Palestinian Authority and Hamas and the United Nations to fund tunnels and rockets and all of this stuff, and our government can't demand the release. of our hostages. The U.S. President Biden, should have issued an immediate demand for the release of American citizens. Hamas wants to play its war with Israel, like, fine, but this is separate. These are American citizens, and this is a national disgrace, and our press refuses to report on this. Um, I have a feeling if there was another president in office right now, that this might be something that would be day 96, 8 Americans held hostage,
Right.
but we don't hear a damn thing about it. And
Yeah.
the Israelis care about their citizens, and it appears we don't, and that's disgraceful.
Yeah, it's that's something else. I just don't. I don't know. It's hard. I mean, I don't know. I want to say it's hard to explain, but it isn't. But I'm more dumbfounded more than
Yeah,
anything.
yeah.
Just, come
I'm
on.
more just disgusted, Joe. I mean,
Yeah.
like these are, look, I joined.
Give me a break.
I'll tell you this, like, the guys in the military would be lining up to get them out.
Oh, yeah, I
And
believe it. Absolutely.
I'm an old man now, and I'd still throw it back on to get an operation, to get involved,
Oh,
and that's what we do, right? That's
oh
what we
no.
join for, to protect
Yeah.
our own. And our government doesn't want to protect our own, and that's,
Yeah.
to someone like me, is infuriating. And
Right. That's you reminded me of a story. I'm glad you said that. I don't know if it was an Israeli official or one of the soldiers is telling me that on October 7th, there were people in the reserves,
yes, I love these stories. Yeah,
Israeli in the reserves that were like 60 years old, 70 years old. They were gearing up, heading
yeah,
to the south. All right. And so, and some of them actually did help. I'm not talking about fighting, but some of them did still put their skills that they learned to use. It could have been translating from Arabic to Hebrew or vice versa, things like that. So everybody was involved after October 7th. So that reminds. I'm glad you brought that up because yeah. So it really like it rallied the troops basically, and I would totally expect that here in the United States as well
yeah,
for
absolutely.
Americans. But I don't know. I don't see enough of it, like you're saying, right? Especially from the administration, which is really unbelievable. So
They're
uh,
so concerned about escalation
yeah,
and serving as an intermediary. How do you serve as an intermediary when one side is holding hostages,
right,
your citizens hostages? It's
right.
I let someone else be an intermediate here. Let the British do it. Let the French, just someone else, because until our hostages are freed, we should not be a party to try to. I can't believe that we're trying to. Anyway, I'm going to stop there because I don't even have words for my thoughts. Joe, let's turn to Hezbollah in the north.
Yeah,
We've
yeah.
had there was a major attack on a base. I actually heard from a friend in Israel too. He has a son and a daughter in the IDF, and his daughter said rockets were landing 100 feet away from her while on this base. Miran, is that correct? Did I get that right? Up in the north?
You meant on. Yeah, yeah. You're right. You're right. You're right. Yep, yep, yep.
Yeah. So this was apparently a major attack. I believe the Hezbollah used Iranian drones. Hezbollah released an infographic saying something like 690 attacks since the war began. Is that right? Did I get that number
I
right?
mean, that sounds about. I
Yeah. So
imagine
which
you're right.
I haven't like crunched the numbers because I'd have to. But that sounds like what, like 5, 6 attacks a day?
Oh yeah, that's about right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I mean, and
yeah,
this was one of these attacks. Just one attack prior to this war would have been a fierce Israeli response. And
yes,
as we know, the Israelis are trying to get a grip on Gaza before turning attention to the north. But I have a feeling, with the killing of Aurori, the deputy Politburo leader of Hamas, with the killing of a Hezbollah, a member of the Rodwan Force was killed by the Israelis. That was this week, right? Rodwan Force is basically Hezbollah's elite units that are designed to cross the border into Israel, to attack Israel and actually penetrate that border. That's something we'll be talking about more in the future. At some point, the Israelis, as you said, well over 100,000 Israelis, the North has been abandoned. The Israel has shrunk. The Israelis can't accept this for much
right. Oh
longer.
no.
And so that's this. I mean, I know you mentioned that, but expand upon that, Joe.
Yeah.
Tell
So
us what we think is coming.
so there's a lot, to unpack here with what you said. So yeah, where to begin. So yeah, especially with okay, so Al Aruri, for example, so he was a Hamas guy. You know, he's way up there. Okay, way up there. Maybe two, three, four around there. Okay, as far as the leadership
He's the biggest
status.
kill they've had
Yeah.
since,
Oh yeah.
since this began, for
Oh
certain, right?
yeah. I mean, they've been after that dude for a long time. He's been a real thorn in the side of the Israelis. He was really he you could call him like an interlocutor between Hamas and Iran and Hezbollah, right? So, and then he also was in charge of the West Bank file, essentially. So any attacks in the West Bank, he was in charge of, and but that goes back for many years, and I could spend a lot of time on that. But yeah, he was a big guy, a top leader rather, and it's funny that my first night in Israel. So I'm sitting there with some having dinner with some people, and one of these people is this Israeli, a former Israeli official, sitting right beside me, and he leans over to me, and he's like, this thick Israeli accent. He's like, they just killed the reports say they killed Al Aruri, and I couldn't believe him. I'm like, you're kidding me, and so I get on my phone, start looking like, oh yeah, no, wow, it really did happen. So, and I'm like, oh no, there's going to be like, and I was in Tel Aviv at the time. I was like, oh, there's going to be rockets here for sure.
Certainly, right.
And
I think you texted me really quickly after
yeah,
that thing too. I remember we jumped on that, right? We quickly wrote that up, and we
we
were
did.
waiting for one of these.
Yeah,
So
yeah, oh yeah, and then of course I started thinking Longboard Journal, right?
you got to get
Wait
to
to write
work.
this up, and I couldn't. But yeah, you were there to save the day. But anyway, yeah. So I was totally expecting rockets, but interestingly, because also let me add that Al Arudi was killed in Beirut, right? And that was a big deal too. So I wasn't sure if it was going to be Hezbollah attacking or Hamas, but interestingly, as of now, Hamas hasn't claimed any attacks against Israel in response to the killing of Al Aruri. So that's interesting. So that can tell you one thing. I can tell you that the Israelis have dismantled so much of their rocket infrastructure that they really can't mount anything significant like they would have previous to October 7th. If this was pre October 7th, there would have been a massive response for this. Massive. But they didn't. Nothing essentially has happened. But Hezbollah has said that they've at least initially has already responded to the killing of Al Aruri. So maybe Hezbollah is doing it for Hamas because Hamas can't really do much, right? Just because of what's going on in Gaza. Um, so yeah, that's the one part about Hamas, about the North. But something else too is I found very interesting. At least this is the picture that I'm getting, is that Israel is getting an understanding, an intelligence, as far as intelligence is concerned, about the locations of important, or I would say important, has members of Hezbollah, especially the members of their Radwan unit, right? Because they already targeted the commander of the Radwan unit, who was he was really up there. He was close to guys like Soleimani and Nasrallah. So this kind of wasn't just some random dude. So and then yesterday or the day before, Israel was targeted the drone commander, or a commander of a drone unit in southern Lebanon. So which was important. Not as It wasn't a huge kill, but still. Interestingly, though, Hezbollah did publish a statement saying that the guy that was killed wasn't some type of drone commander or something to that effect, which is they usually don't do that. So I found that interesting. But anyway, so to me, Israel is, I won't say beating Hezbollah, okay, but they're making Hezbollah pay for 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 uh for Hezbollah being for Hezbollah choosing to be in this war, okay? Because they choose to be in this war. That's the important thing. They're the ones that started firing right after October 7th, and then started up again after the ceasefire in, I think it was like early December, right? When the ceasefire was over in early December. So so Israel's making them pay dearly for this. There's more than 150 Hezbollah members killed already at the border. So Israel has a good, I think, a good grip on the situation right now within the north. However, uh, that can expand, right? There's a lot of talk about Israel not wanting Hezbollah to be at the border anymore, that they need to move north, right? Whether it's 3 kilometers or 6 kilometers north of the Litani, south of the Litani, I don't know. I mean, but they'll figure something out there. But definitely going back to October 7th, that ain't happening. Okay. And that's something I got as well from being there, not just reading the news, just by talking to people. The situation on the northern border pre-October 7th, they're not going back to it. So hopefully it could be resolved diplomatically, but I think Israel is definitely willing to use force for that to happen. So again, the North still is quite active, still active right now, a lot of shooting. Um, so yeah, that's where we're at.
It's interesting. You brought up they're going toe to toe with Hezbollah. It's not an all out conflict, which we do expect to happen at some point. But it's striking when looking at the militia attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq and in Syria, where we look at our ability to, or our willingness to strike back, only 7 strikes versus 115 against our forces. Whereas the Israelis, when Hezbollah launches, the Israelis strike back, and they're actually, as you said, making them pay. It's not stopping Hezbollah from attacking, but it's certainly maybe stopping Hezbollah from escalating. Because I think once this does kick off in the north, I think this is going to be intense. And the Israelis, by evacuating the north, I think they've taken something off the table. The ability for them, sure, communities may be hit, but civilian casualties will be very low. I do expect that to be a very intense campaign. Israelis are going to have to, at some point in time, start this. They can't do what they're doing now indefinitely, because the
Right.
civilians are being displaced for quite some time, and the call up of reserves that are needed to ensure the defense of northern Israel. So I don't know. I don't know what that time frame is for the real kickoff with Hezbollah. If it even happens, actually, then that also certainly is a possibility. Maybe Hezbollah decides to wind this down, but I'm not sure the Israelis can afford to just let this back off and go back to status quo, given the number of attacks, the intensity of attacks that Hezbollah has conducted.
Oh yeah, I mean, listen, I'm not gonna say everything is fine and dandy on the Israeli side on the north. There's like, I mean, the communities are, a lot of them been hit, and thankfully their civilians have been evacuated. It's a mixed bag where Hezbollah attacks a lot of IDF positions, but they also attack civilian communities too. So there's damage that has been done, and of course we know, with all the citizens being evacuated. But overall, right now, I think what the Israelis are doing, I have a good feeling the Israelis are um, destroying a lot of important infrastructure of Hezbollah. Okay, in southern Lebanon, I won't go into detail about that, but I think that they're taking the opportunity to do that now, which is obviously a good thing. Um, and they're making Nasrallah think twice about this decision. Is it worth it? Has it been worth it losing these important commanders? I mean, listen, you can replace rockets, you can replace foot soldiers, right? But can you replace a guy with decades or many years of experience, of real battlefield experience, especially those that served in Syria, right? Yeah, of course they're bad guys, but it's difficult to replace, experience, right? So, and Israel is going after those guys specifically. So, um, I don't see that this is whatever Nasrallah's strategy is right now. It's to affect, and to an extent rather, Iran's strategy, because obviously Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy. Um, I I think it's failing, to be quite honest with you. Yeah, it's tying up. I think it's tying up the Israeli military a bit, because the Israelis, the military has to keep a part of its forces concentrated in the north instead of using them in Gaza. So, but overall, I think that strategy is failing. There's not really I don't see this one notable attack by Hezbollah against Israelis right now all this war. Yeah, there have been some hits against, I guess, the Northern Command and then some other sites, but I nothing too impressive to be quite honest with you. So I really think Israel is, it has this leverage over Hezbollah right now because I think Hezbollah was primarily created to defend itself, defend its own territory under an alleged Israeli after an Israeli attack, let's say, right? But this is different. It's going the other way now, right? Hezbollah is attacking Israeli territory. Um, so yeah, I don't think it's going well for Hezbollah or nearly as well as they wanted to. So that's just my take so far that I've seen.
I'm in agreement, Joe. The I think Nasrallah, I think Hezbollah is kind of boxed in here. If they go all out, they risk losing because I don't think the Israelis are going to pull punches here. I don't think they've clearly signaled that time is not an issue. That time issue that you and I worried about at the
Right.
onset of
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
it hasn't impacted the Israelis and that is because, as we discussed earlier, they're united.
They are.
So
Mhm.
the the I don't think they're going to hold back if they go after Hezbollah. Like Nasrallah
No.
will be a target.
Oh yeah.
All of the key commanders will be a target. Key infrastructure will be. They're going to hit them everywhere if the Israelis do decide to go for it. And that I think Nasrallah and I think the Iranians recognize this, and I think this is why you haven't seen an escalation. I mean, we can argue, right? 5, 6 attacks a day is an escalation from before, but it's not an all-out onslaught from
No.
Hezbollah like we saw in 2007, right? That
Right.
the war back then when there was just a full exchange. I
It could
think
be so much worse. It could be so much worse right now.
absolutely.
So it's most of it's limited to the border area. All right. So between Israel and Lebanon. So which is a good thing. But you're absolutely right, Bill. Absolutely.
So, Joe, any other observations
Um.
since?
Yeah. 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 I think I covered most of it. To be quite honest with you, I again I go back to this, and this is for our listeners, of course. And if you're someone that's interested in this field, right, you want to be an analyst, especially especially in this field. Um, it's if you have the opportunity to go somewhere that's of your interest, right, whatever it may be. I think you should do it. Of course, you have to take the normal safety precautions. But you grow, you learn a lot and then you grow as an analyst, right? So you can understand things a lot better. And when things happen, uh, and you can almost, I don't know, kind of read between the lines when certain events happen, right? So because you've experienced something similar, right? So so because that's something else that I learned too, just talking to Israelis, that people here in the West, they don't understand. Most people don't understand war because they've never experienced it, right? They don't have the experience of being shelled. They don't have the experience I don't know, having to carry their phone around everywhere just to make sure the red alert doesn't go off the alert app, just things like that. So I think a lot of people just, especially here in the West, don't understand what's going on over there, right? Because they haven't experienced it. You don't experience it, can't really truly understand. So I think that's one big thing that I learned as well, that, I think Israelis, people over there would want people to, over here at least, try to get better, better feeling, better understanding of what everybody's going through over there and why they're in this war, why Israel's in this war. Because that's being lost over time. I mean, but it's definitely not the first time with this type of conflict. I mean, we see it, I think, with Russia, Ukraine, and then other conflicts, right? So yeah, it's just that people here don't get it because they've never experienced it, right? So, but I'm sure you understand, Bill.
Yeah,
So
you're right. And the people who that are here understand it primarily served in the military, served in
sure,
combat zones.
sure, yeah,
They don't understand that Israel, that Ukraine are in, existential fight here. And
yes, they
there's
are.
reasons that they have to do what they're doing. If Hamas didn't want this war, they shouldn't have started it. If they didn't want to face destruction, And if they don't want civilians to be killed, which are going to be killed in any conflict, then they really shouldn't start it. Don't start wars you don't want to finish.
Exactly. And that's what happened here. That's it's what's happening here, unfortunately. But Hamas knew what was going to happen. I mean, maybe not to this extent, but they knew it was going to be, and we've talked about it before, as an enormous reprisal or a response by Israel. It was going to be, for sure. Maybe Hamas bit off more than they can chew, I think, with all the hostages that were taken and all the destruction that they created. But so Hamas, they understood what was going to happen. So yeah, I blame all of this on Hamas, absolutely, and their allies. So we'll see how long this goes on. But yeah, so that was my experience. It was great. I'm glad I went, got to talk to people, felt like what it was, what things were going on the ground, and got to witness some stuff that I definitely couldn't have done without being there, right? And gotten these important experiences. So yeah, it was overall, it was great, Bill.
Yeah, Joe, I'm in a bizarre way, I'm glad you got to experience it. It's sad that we, have to do these things. It's in wartime, but look, that's our job, right? And to understand these. And I don't think you really can truly appreciate, what civilians, what soldiers go through in times of war unless you've actually been there. Television just doesn't get it quite across.
No.
Joe, great to have you on today. Thank you for sharing your perspectives, and we're going to get back on target with our Monday episodes now that you're back.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us for today's episode of Generation Jihad. Just a reminder, you can find us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. Make sure you subscribe and leave us a review. Thanks again. We'll see you all again soon.